Took us longer than usual to get to this day, but we are here. Welcome to the beginning of our NBA full league tour de force. We'll go through each team one by one. Although this year it might be more like 2 by 2, but can't do it at the same exact time. It's still 1 by 1. It's just that we might be doing 2 teams per podcast episode. And maybe that'll have something to do with the teams, whether some are quicker than others and blah, blah, blah. But either way, it is team preview time on Old Man Squad Fantasy Basketball. I'm Dan Vespers. Thanks so much for tuning in. Thank you to all 4 of our guests from earlier this week. Awesome dudes, terrific fantasy minds. That was Dan Titus back on Monday, Mike Barner on Tuesday, Mike Catron on Wednesday, and Alex Rickleen yesterday. And I'm pleased to announce that we've been able to reschedule my good buddy Matt Smith for early next week. We'll probably have Red Bauer on at some point next week, hoping to get my longtime buddy Eric Ong at some point in the next week and a half or so. Robin Marks will be on the show as well, so plenty more voices coming. The reason, just quickly before we dive into the teams involved, the reason that we're doing this team-by-team thing in July instead of May this year is that, and I'll admit, it was harder, by the way, because normally I like to get into this stuff in May, and it chews up basically like an entire month of what's really the dead time of the offseason. The reason I chose to push it later, which again, mind you, more difficult for yours truly, because we had to come up with more things to talk about before I got to it, is that I kind of stopped and I thought, well, what is more useful for me? Is it more useful for me to review all the teams that just finished up? So you just finished the 2023-24 campaign. Or is it more useful for me to look at what's coming next? And in that moment, I thought, well, this actually is fairly straightforward for me. I would rather hear, if somebody was going to talk to me about it, I'd rather them tell me what I should do next as opposed to going over what just happened. And then number 2 on that same sort of reasons board or whatever you want to call it, I also kind of figured, all right, what's the point? The Clippers, for instance, who we're going to talk about here in a couple of minutes, what would have been the point in talking about the Clippers this last year when their second most important player is gone? Like, great, if we did this show in May, I would have been able to say something like, oh, yeah, Paul George had a really good year. He's number 12. But Paul George ain't there anymore. That show would have been obsolete in a month and a half. And so selfishly, I didn't want to do a bunch of programs that would immediately turn to not useful anymore. And so then became the great discussion inside my own head of how the hell do we get to mid-July without talking specifically about the teams in the NBA? And that is where the magic of our awesome guests come in. An opportunity to talk to other people. We've done 20 some odd guest shows already, and the podcast has only existed for like 2 months. It's like half our shows, which, by the way, is going to continue even now that we're into this team review, team preview kind of thing. And fun little footnote, we're hoping to get a few guests that can help us through these team previews, folks that focus more specifically on an individual team and have that insight and can dig a little bit deeper. I don't plan on doing this prologue, either way, to the team by team, but I felt like it was important to do before the very first one. So today we're doing Lakers and we're doing Clippers. And I didn't go through and build a bunch of graphics. Maybe I should have, but I thought it might be easier just to give a shout out to our buddies over at Basketball Monster, because I can throw this on the screen, which is a breakdown of the numbers from this past year. And you guys can just see all the players that I'm going to talk about. So this is past year. That's what you're seeing on your screen. And yes, we're going to make adjustments going forward for the players that are in and the players that are out. Let's start with the Clippers' most relevant roster moves of the offseason. The biggest one, unquestionably, is that Paul George is gone. Paul George signed a long-term deal with the Philadelphia 76ers, and the Clippers, by and large, didn't really replace him. Yeah, I know. Like, they brought in some dudes, but by and large, they didn't really replace him. Who did they bring in? Well, I would argue the biggest, most team-relevant signing of the offseason for the Clippers was likely Derrick Jones Jr. They brought in some other dudes as well. A lot of kind of resurrection type of projects, like a Kai Jones, who did some loony stuff. Kevin Porter Jr., who's done some absolute trash, garbage stuff. That, to me, just makes it kind of harder to be a Clippers fan. But, oh well. That's where they're at. That's the direction they decided to go. And so if you're a Clippers fan, you just kind of have to grin and bear it. But from an overall standpoint of, who's in and who's out, the Clippers in mostly low usage guys and reclamation guys, and out one extraordinarily high usage player in Paul George. You can pretty much leave the who's in, who's out discussion for that. So then we get to the next part of our discussion, which is who's going to likely have value and how much. Let's start at the top. The most easy players to look at are James Harden and Kawhi Leonard. I believe they're wearing number 1 and number 2 on this team. So even easier, right at the top of the numerical board. Kawhi Leonard yesterday dropped out of the Olympics. We don't know the exact reasons why, whether he's not fully healthy or is fully healthy, but the Clippers don't want to risk him becoming not fully healthy. Either way, he's not playing for Team USA. This past season, Kawhi played 68 out of 82 games, averaged about almost 24 points, about 2 3-pointers, 6 boards, 3.5 assists, 1.6 steals, just under 1 block ball game on 52.5 and 88.5 splits. Terrific percentages from the field. And also extremely low turnovers for a guy who did as much as he did at just 1.8. He was number 7 on a per-game basis. He was number 6 by totals because you had Joel Embiid, who's at the top of the board on per game, fell out of the top of the board by totals, and everybody that was near him moved up 1 slot. This was, by all accounts, the best season by totals for Kawhi Leonard in a very, very long time. 68 ball games is more than I think anyone could have ever expected out of Kawhi. And even when we were drafting him, he was a big-time target for anybody that listened to my podcast last year. The expectation was more like 60 to 62 range, which, some leeway on either side. But we're talking about a guy that had played 52 games the year before, 52 the year before that. That was one of the COVID seasons, so he missed 20. He missed 15 during his first year with the Clippers. That was the COVID season. Last year, but with the Raptors, I think he was at 60 that season. So this is not a guy who's making it through a full NBA campaign, and he hasn't really come all that close since his last year in San Antonio. Not the year where, the last healthy year in San Antonio before all the neurodegenerative stuff kicked in. He played 74 out of 82 games that season. Since then, 9. So missed 73 games, missed 22 games, missed 15, missed 20, did not play, missed an entire season, remember. That was the ACL. Missed 30 coming back from the ACL injury, and then 14 this past year was extraordinary. But he finished the year hurt. And I don't think the Clippers are going to forget that, because this past season, this was the whole Kawhi, PG, you guys are going to make it through the damn year. This is our shot. And then Kawhi wasn't there for the playoffs anyway. But I would argue the alternate point also, even when they were being particularly gentle, oven-mitty with Kawhi, he still often missed the playoffs. There was no guarantee that even if he was upright during most of the very cautious regular season, that he was actually going to get to play in the postseason. COVID season with the Clippers, he was mostly there in the playoffs. The following year, he was mostly there in the playoffs. The last two, he hasn't been. And this year, he was mostly healthy. The year before, they tried to get him right coming back, and he still couldn't get healthy. So is the lesson that it doesn't make any difference? It might be. But I'll admit I am worried. He's dropping out of the Olympics, meaning I don't believe he's fully healthy right now. And even if he was, again, that's a bad sign that the Clippers are just like, look, we got to play ultra cautious here, even if this is a really big thing for you in your personal life. Sorry, we need you more than ever because Paul George is gone. I guess there's the other side of that same coin to say, well, the Clippers are so worried about this regular season, about actually getting a marginally decent playoff seed, that they're like, Kawhi, you can't do anything else. We need you to play in as many regular season games as possible this year, because otherwise, we're not that great. James Harden and waves hands at the board are not going to win enough games to get you out of the play-in in the West. James Harden plus Kawhi plus waves hands at the board might get you above the play-in. Might, mind you. So what do I expect from Kawhi Leonard this coming year? Well, I think you can probably dial the expectation on games played back down towards 62. Anything above that, big-time gravy. Anything below that, well, that was the risk you took. I would probably take Kawhi Leonard in a games cap format anywhere beyond pick 18. That doesn't mean I want to pick him at pick 19. It means that if the rest of the board looks awful, that's where I would at least consider him. I would be much happier taking Kawhi Leonard around the end of the second round, beginning of the third, which is basically where he went last year. I don't think he's going to fall that far because expectations, probably correct, by the way, in assuming he's going to go back up from 17 shots a game to probably more like 18 and a half or 19, meaning more stuff, more than 24 points per game, probably more than 3.5 assists, probably more than 2.1 threes. Every little thing you add with Kawhi, because he's so freaking efficient, is like a triple bonus for him. And you're looking at a dude that could very easily be top 5 per game this coming season. Top 5, and I mean, you can go through recent years to find a top 5 player who played in, like 62-ish basketball games. Best super recent example would be like Anthony. He played in 56 that year. Let's go back a little farther, see if we can find one to throw at you. LeBron, going back to 2021-22, that was the sort of mega year for the Lakers. AD was not healthy, played in only 40 games that season. LeBron was number 4. We played in only 56 games that year, which dropped him to number 16 by totals. And I think that's a really good comparison to what I believe you can get out of Kawhi Leonard this year. Top 4-ish per game, top 4, top 5. Probably somewhere between, was that a COVID year? No, that was an 82-game season. Yeah, so he missed 26 games. Kawhi could miss 26 games. That would drop him to middle of the second round by totals. If he plays anything more than that, he continues to sort of push farther up the board. The absolute earliest I would take Kawhi Leonard if the board was a disaster is, like I said, around 18. In head-to-head, I don't know that you can take him at all because you just know you're getting in too deep. Now, if he falls to like the third round and you can get a guy who's almost definitely going to be a mid to high first round per gamer at that point, then you probably take the plunge in head-to-head. Games cap roto, again, try not to go earlier than 18. I think there are enough guys that aren't super hurt all the time that he'll get pushed down into that neighborhood. But I can't guarantee it because some reliable names from this past year, like Steph Curry, Damian Lillard, those guys were way farther down the board than usual. Could they push so deep that Kawhi gets in front of them? I doubt it. I think you still see Steph, Dame, Tatum, Booker. I think these guys still go ahead of Kawhi just because there's an assumption that they make it through most of the season. What about James Harden? He's, of course, the other big name on this Clippers side. And I think most analysts agree that he's the guy that's really going to benefit from this Paul George thing, because Harden went from the clear third wheel on this club, which, mind you, still had a nice year. He was still number 26 per game. And as we talked about, my Yahoo Public League drafts, these are prize leagues too. I tried to do those as late as humanly possible. It's like the Sunday before the season started. I got Harden in the late 50s. He ain't fallen that far. But he put up, beginning of the third round value after kind of a slow start to the year while he was finding his way with that team. Ended up averaging 16.5 points, super low for James, 8.5 assists. But you guys don't need me to go through all the numbers. Everybody knows that's played fantasy sports for more than a week that James Harden has an unreal fantasy stat set. He was the number one player in fantasy sports for the better part of half a decade. He was the guy before Nikola Jokic dethroned the guy, and Harden got fatted his way out of Houston, and then has sort of bounced between teams since then. Brooklyn, Philly, Clippers, all that good stuff. This is a guy, now again, Harden took 11.5 shots a game last year. This is so much lower than almost anything he's done in his career before. And the reason is because he was, for the first time ever, the clear third fiddle. Even in Philly, I know they had Tyrese Maxey, but Harden could still sort of shoehorn himself into a 2A and 2B thing with Maxey. 2B or not. Sorry, I almost did it. And even in that role, last season, not this Clippers year, but the previous year in Philly, alongside a Tyrese Maxey that was starting to rev up his usage, not quite to what we got this year, but pretty damn high, Harden on 14.5 shots per game, averaged 21 and 11 with 2.8 threes and medium-ish high volume, super positive free throw numbers. And I know turnovers are always going to be a thing for James. He was at 3.5 turnovers a game that year, and that's going to sag his numbers a bit in 9-cat versus 8. But regardless, James Harden in his Philly season, where the hell did that dude end up? He was number 17 in 9-cat. That was with the big turnovers. To me, that's an easy rank for him to get back to. To go from early third to mid-second round this year? Absolutely. I think there's a very reasonable chance that James Harden gets drafted near the turn, because the names thin out a lot by the time you get to that point. Think about it this way. Forget how I want to rank players. Let's think about where you think guys are going to get drafted. Who's going to get drafted in the first round? Wemby, Shea, Jokic, Luka are the obvious ones. I still think Embiid goes in most first rounds just because of how good he is per game. Then you get to AD, probably. Halliburton, probably. Kevin Durant, probably. Later first. Is Tatum still going in the first round? I think decent chance. Does Donovan Mitchell go in the first round now after he's been a first rounder for 2 years in Cleveland? Conceivably. Is Steph still going in the first? I actually don't know. Dame? I don't think so anymore. LeBron? Doubt it. Booker? Kyrie? These guys are pushing into that same neighborhood. So now, this is where, at least in my eyes, this is where I think you're going to get into where does Harden fall? Does Harden fall with those guys I just listed, like Booker and Dame and Steph? And maybe even Scotty Barnes, Larry Markkinen. Is that the group? Kyrie, Donovan Mitchell, are they all in that same group between 9 and 13 or 14? I think the answer to that is yes. And I'll tell you what, I'm not taking Harden at I'm not taking him at 8. Although an 8-cat, you could make an argument for it. Small argument, but you could make an argument for it. But I'll say this, if the board is so dry, at the back end of the turn, let's say you have pick 11, you don't take him there, Harden doesn't go at 12 or 13, I think I'd be pretty comfortable taking him around 14. Because what do we think the worst case per game. Forget injury stuff. I know Harden is older, but like generally when he wants to play a full season, he can do it. What do we think the floor is for Harden this year? The floor is 25. That's basically what he did last year, and he's going to get a bunch more this season. That's the floor. I feel pretty comfortable taking a second rounder, early, mid, late, whatever, whose floor is second round. I don't mean to pick on Mikal Bridges, but he was a second rounder last year whose floor, well, he blew through the floor, but the presumed floor was like what he did in Phoenix is probably the floor, 55 range. Still, that was more dangerous. Desmond Bane was going late second round. His floor was like 40 something. How often can you take a second rounder? Maybe you don't believe that Harden's going to be a first rounder, but man, isn't it nice to think that there's a guy out there that you could take in the second round and you know he ain't going to be worse than like 30? I think there's an inherent value in that. What about the rest of the Clippers? Because we still got to get to the Lakers, and we're deep diving this thing. Ivica Zubac, he was number 97 last year on about 12-9. I expect him to do more this season. Mason Plumlee is gone. Daniel Tice is gone. The Clippers' front court has gotten thinner, and their pick-and-roll game has gotten thicker. With more James Harden on ball, that's going to be more pick-and-roll stuff. And I know they got Mo Bamba, and he's going to soak up a handful of bench minutes, and that's always going to keep Zubac from playing a consistent 30, but I don't need 30 out of him. Frankly, what he did last year was just barely enough. Finally, he cleared that 26-minute threshold. That's always kind of been the number we've looked at and said, look, if he could get to like 27, then you could reliably plop him into your lineups. But he's going to rebound. He's going to get you field goal percent. He's not going to tank your free throw number. I think Zubac is a really safe center pick around 8th round. I see no problem with that. What about Norman Powell, and what about Derek Jones Jr.? I think those are the only two Clippers that really need our attention on today's show, because the rest of these guys, look, Nick Batum is there again. He'll have like 3 weeks this year where he has value because someone was hurt, and then he'll get hurt at the end of that. Terrence Mann will do the same thing he always does, where he has value for a week and then disappears. This is how the Clippers rotate through. Bones will probably have a week where he has value. Brandon Boston will have a week where he has value. Don't worry about those guys. These are not dudes you need to target on draft night. The ones that you need to at least think about, and let's talk through it for a minute, are Derek Jones Jr. and Norman Powell. So Derek Jones Jr., let's start with the new acquisition, probably slots into the Paul George spot. And you're like, but Dan, why Norm was there? Why doesn't he just slot into that? Well, I think the Clippers are going to want somebody who's a little more defensive in nature. I think they feel comfortable with Harden and Kawhi leading that first unit. If Derek Jones can space the floor a little bit, it won't be a ton because he had 1.1 3-pointers that last year, then that'll be sufficient because Kawhi can shoot the 3, Harden can shoot the 3, Zubac will not. And then that last spot is going to be, like we talked about, the revolving door. It'll be Batum for a couple weeks. It'll be Mann for a couple of weeks. They'll slot it all in. I don't think it's going to be Norman Powell. I think they're going to want to bring him off the bench, but honestly, in my eyes, it doesn't really matter. I don't think Derek Jones does enough from a usage standpoint to be a value all season long. He was number 240 last year in 23 and a half minutes per ball game behind Luka and Kyrie. Admittedly, those two guys are going to have more usage than the two lead guys on the Clippers, but the third guy on the Clippers pretty well parallels or may even exceed the third guy on the Mavericks this last year. So I don't think that Jones is going to get like a whole bunch more shots. 6.5 shots per game. Yeah, that could go up to like 8.5, but you're still pretty far out on consistent fantasy value. Mostly because, and I like Derek Jones Jr., he's a decent ball player, but he's a bad free throw shooter. The steals and blocks, he might get you around 1 apiece if his minutes get up into the high 20s to low 30s. And that's intriguing, being a 1-1-1 guy. But to me, his ceiling is top 100. I think that's where he maxes out. Which, at the end of your draft, you're hunting for guys that might blast inside like the top 90, top 80, and consistently stick there. Derek Jones Jr. is probably not one of my guys in that range. If he fixes his free throw stroke or something shifts, then maybe. But even when Kawhi Leonard inevitably misses a bunch of ball games this year, I don't think Jones is going to be a guy who's like, oh, yeah, I get to take 3 more shots for this week. That'll be Norm. And that is our segue to Norman Powell, who I think is more your burger board champion of the century. Because Norm got 10 shots a game this last year. He's a good percentages dude, doesn't get many steals or blocks, mostly points, threes, and efficiency on low turnovers, meaning you got to have a bunch of usage. Otherwise, he's not going to get there. So he finished at 168. Did play in 76 ball games. Nice durability this last year. Hasn't always been the calling card for Norm, but if that sticks again, that would be good. Because every time Kawhi misses a game, you're going to want to get Norm in your lineup. Because that's when his shots per game go from probably around a dozen, would be my guess this year, behind just Harden and Kawhi. I think he can get 12 shots per game. That probably gets Norm to about top 115, top 125 range. But when the team is not fully healthy, which we know is going to be a quarter of the season, probably at least, those games, Norm gets 15 shots. And 15-shot Norman Powell is very much a fantasy player. Very much a fantasy player. And we have the evidence to speak on that. But therein lies the rub. Do you squat on Norm the entire year for those 25 to 30 games where he's definitely going to be a value? Or do you try to wait and pick him up on those days where he's going to be a value? But look back at, you can look at, let's see. You can go to Portland, honestly. After the trade from Toronto to Portland, 2021-22, with the Blazers, he took 13.5 shots a game, averaged 19 points. Because the free throws were great, the threes were good. Again, steals were a little bit better then. There's a wacky universe where he could get to 0.8 steals per game. He was playing 33 minutes a game at that juncture. But that to me is a more comparable kind of number to when a guy is out. When the team is healthy, you're probably looking at a lot like what the Clippers' Norm was before James Harden showed up, which wasn't bad. Hell, that was last year. Can we remember back that far? I don't know. My brain is addled, crusty, and old. He was number 150, 17 points, 2 3-pointers on decent percentages. But as we talked about, there needs to be more than that. A dozen shots for him, as we talked about, gets him into that 125, 130 something range, because that year he only shot, his splits were 48, 81. Free throw goes a little bit better. Field goal stays the same. Whatever. That's how you move from rank 150 to 135 in a blink. But it needs to be more than 12. 12 shots ain't enough because he doesn't do anything else. So that's why I think when the team is healthy, you're looking at Norm in the 12 to 12.5 range of shots. And that's, again, probably 125 range. And when Kawhi goes down and he gets 15 shots a night, that's when he blasts himself forward into startable. What was his rank in Portland that year when he took a bunch more shots? I'm trying to remember. What season was that? 21-22? Or was it? Yeah, he was number 84 on 13.5 shots per game. And the funny thing is, maybe that's around where he ends up for the entire season this year if Kawhi misses 35 games. So then you look back and you're like, oh, I guess Norm was a value the whole year. But no, not really, because it'll be half the time he's top 50, top 60, and the other half he's 125. And how you want to deal with that, head-to-head side, that would play, I think, because at least then you're getting stats. But Roto, you'd want to just start him on the days where he's putting up good numbers. All right, let's flip on over and go to the Lakers. It's going to take me a second here just to change the page for those that are watching on YouTube. And actually, this is a perfectly good opportunity for me to remind everybody, if you're watching with us, please, friends, please hit the thumbs up button and subscribe. And if you're listening after the fact, subscribe and leave a 5-star review. It goes a long way towards everything that we're trying to build here on Old Man Squad Fantasy Basketball. Lakers. The reason I was comfortable talking about the Clippers for a half an hour is because right now, the Lakers don't have that many stories. Okay, that's not a fair way to describe them. The Lakers have plenty of stories, but the Lakers have very little reality changing other than basically the head coach. Taurean Prince is gone to Milwaukee. He played 27 minutes a game last year, but Jared Vanderbilt missed almost the entire year. Gabe Vincent missed almost the entire year. Those guys are expected to be alive to begin this season. There's also an expectation that Max Christie is going to play a little bit more this coming year. Let's make sure you guys can actually see everything that I'm talking about. And so between all of that, those dudes pretty much make up for whatever Taurean Prince leaves behind. Christian Wood, Jackson Hayes, these guys are all opting into that second year of their deals. Lakers are feeling a little bit foolish about some of that and feeling fine about others. But by and large, the Lakers are still an Anthony Davis, LeBron James, D'Angelo Russell, Austin Reeves basketball team that had a Rui Hachimura stretch at the end of the year that likely won't continue because of Jared Vanderbilt. You can very quickly wipe a lot of Laker names off your board as they are currently constructed. Basically, everybody other than the top four. Vanderbilt's not going to be able to do enough while Rui's healthy, and same story on the flip side. Neither one of those dudes is going to be able to play enough consistently to have value while the other one is healthy. Christian Wood is not going to get enough minutes, although I think they will give him more time at the 5 in some big lineups. Again, provided they don't make a move. Max Christie's not going to play enough to have value. It's AD, LeBron, D'Lo, and Reeves right now. AD was number 4 this past year, played in 76 out of 82 games. They're going to need him to stay healthy again this coming year, and I feel very comfortable taking AD towards the back end of the first round. LeBron was number 17 this past year, shooting a ridiculous 54% from the field, including, and I can triple check myself on this, I believe LeBron shot a career high in three-point efficiency this year. Combination of three-point percent and how many went in. He made 2.1 on 41% from three. Yes, that was actually his best three-point field goal percent. He's had a couple years where he hit more threes than that, but just like shot selection this year was much better for LeBron. He wasn't casting from three, although when you shoot 41%, maybe perhaps you should be. Although dude shot 60% from 2, so 6 of 1, half dozen kind of thing. Regardless, every year now, we all look at the board and we say, is this the year that LeBron starts to fade a little bit? Is this the year LeBron starts to fade a little bit? And every year, the answer ends up being no. At some point, the answer is going to be yes. But this was a tenet for me when I was much larger into sports betting, which is, and I've said this about fantasy, it's easier to not try to be the smartest person in the room. And what I mean by that is, and this could go for the stock market also, you could try to be the smartest person in the room by fading a team on a hot streak. Oh, this is the year that Vegas, the line finally moved too far. This is the year. Now we're going back the other way. Or a game, I should say, for Vegas. But you might miss 4 or 5 games in a row when a team is just playing above their power ranking. That happens in sports betting. And it's kind of similar with LeBron, where every year, myself included, by the way, last year I was like, I don't want to take LeBron until the 30s. And then he was number 17. So I got him nowhere, and he ended up as a really nice fantasy play. But every year we all do the same exercise, which is, this is the year, right? This is it. And we all think about fading him. And then he pretty much beats his ADP. Or doesn't beat his ADP, but has a good year. Because for a long time, with the free throw stuff, he wouldn't beat his ADP, but he had a nice season. I've seen very few indicators that LeBron, from a fantasy standpoint, is set to take a step back. From a reality standpoint, he's not running as much on defense. Okay, but he's jumping passing lanes, so the steals stayed at 1.3. The one thing that would cause LeBron to drop a little bit this year would be if the Lakers get off to a good start and they can manage his minutes, because 35.3 is too high for him. 71 games is probably too high for him also, but they needed every damn one of them this last year because the Lakers were bad for the first half of the season until they figured out a lineup that worked. If they trot a lineup out there that starts the season working, and the Lakers, I mean, they're not going to be like a world-beating team, but let's say that in December, they're 7-8 games over 500 instead of a break even. That's going to allow them to throw it into neutral a few more times. That'll let LeBron rest against some teams that they're, say, probably going to lose against, or maybe against a really bad team where they feel like they can take the day off. So maybe LeBron's game target is more like 67 instead of 71 or 72. And maybe you could argue the same thing about Anthony Davis. Maybe his game target isn't 76 if they get off to a decent start this year. But if you have Lakers on your fantasy team, you should be rooting for a bad start to the year. Fantasy, reality, whatever, because that'll force those dudes onto the floor. D'Lo finished at 64 this past year. Again, as the team is currently constructed, he probably can do that again. And Austin Reeves was number 88. And I will say again, as the team is currently constructed, he could probably be able to do that again, maybe even a tiny bit better. We've heard they want a little bit more of Reeves on ball. But it does feel like we'd be cutting a corner and kind of taking the easy path if we didn't at least spend 3 or 4 minutes on what's possible for the Lakers. I don't want to say probable because Rob Pelinka keeps coming out and talking about how incredibly difficult it is to make a trade in the NBA right now. But we all know the Lakers are linked to Kyle Kuzma and Jeremy Grant and Zach LaVine. Those are the 3 names, at least, that have sort of been the loudest in connection. And Wendell Carter Jr. actually is one that's come up here lately as well. Probably won't cost quite as much. Although with LaVine, the contract is so bad that one might actually not cost him anything other than cap space. And that would shake things up a little bit. So let's just do, say, 45 seconds on each of those guys. I'm not good enough with the salary cap to know exactly who would have to go out in each of these trades, but presumably Rui Hachimura is probably involved in all of them because he's making close to $20 million a year, and they're going to need a nice big salary match for all of this stuff. I think they can get to Wendell's salary without a whole lot else on there. LaVine's would take a bunch of dudes, a bunch of money. And Jeremy Grant, he's closer to like high 20s right now. So you could go Rui, and is there some lower money guy like a Vanderbilt or something like that? I probably don't want to give away both of your other wings. We know that D'Lo's on the block, but I don't think they're going to give him away for nothing because he actually was a pretty good regular season fit on that team. But let's just say Jeremy Grant rolls into LA, and let's say Rui is the obvious guy that goes out in that deal. Jeremy Grant's the starting 3 on the Lakers if he gets traded, and LeBron is the starting 4, so that kind of flips a little bit, although LeBron and Rui were sort of interchangeable, I guess, in the starting 5. It's better for LeBron to be the 4, by the way, in terms of who he's guarding on defense. And for Jeremy Grant, I would not trust him as far as I can throw him because he has stopped rebounding. He's stopped doing a lot of defensive stuff. So what's left? If Jeremy Grant ends up on the Lakers, I don't think I'm inclined to want to draft him. Even if D'Lo's gone, I know that throws a bunch of usage back in the pool. But look, I don't want to freak you guys out or anything. But Jeremy Grant's numbers this past year were god awful. He was number 121 while taking almost 16 shots a ball game. I don't think he's getting that much usage in LA. 1.4 combined steals and blocks in starters minutes. Yuck. 3.5 rebounds in starters minutes. Yuck. What about Kyle Kuzma? Well, from a reality fit, I actually think he'd be a very good fit on the Lakers, but no way he's getting to 19 shots in LA. You could send the whole damn team back other than AD and LeBron, and he still doesn't get to 19 shots. So, nope. Wendell Carter Jr., let's say he comes to Los Angeles. Is he going to get to do enough at the 5 alongside Anthony Davis? I don't think he's playing 26 minutes a ball game in LA, and he was number 166 last year anyway. So, nope. And the last one on that list was Zach LaVine, who, yeah, I mean, you kind of have to draft him if he ends up in LA, because on that one, a couple players are going back. That's probably what, D'Lo and Rui and some other stuff. So yeah, there'd still be enough. I don't know that he gets to 18 shots, which is what he took his last full season in Chicago, but 15, something like that, quite achievable. And that probably puts him somewhere in the 70 to 100 range on per game value. And if that one goes down, then yes, he becomes a fantasy value. What about who goes the other way? Like, would you take Rui Hachimura in Portland? I don't know. Would you take D'Lo on Chicago? I don't know. They've got point guards coming out of their ears right now. That's a bridge we'll cross if we get there. For today on the show, I just want to think about what it means for the Lakers if they make any of these trades. So again, if Zach LaVine's the guy they end up ultimately taking on, which feels very desperation level, but he is pretty freaking good when he's healthy, and he's just sourpuss in Chicago right now. I think, you'll still get enough out of LaVine basically just takes D'Lo's spot as the fourth guy with value. And any of the other trades that I mentioned, I think you're left with only 3 Lakers with value. And I think for any of those other trades, Austin Reeves, he starts to teeter kind of on the edge of the top 100, almost for any of these, actually. I don't think they'll take the ball out of his hand for Grant and for Kuz quite as much, but those guys are going to have a higher usage rate than Rui going out. And the question there becomes whether or not D'Lo is a part of it. But again, that'll be a nice question for someone who's better with the salary cap, and they can answer that. Questions from the chat room before we wrap things up on today's show. Dan, I hope you're ready for all the guff. Yeah, on yesterday's show, I apologized for the fact that I had to push Matt Smith off until the beginning of next week, and I insisted that I receive the bulk, all of the guff. So yes, do not give Matt any guff. All the guff goes unto me. I'm going to skip over one question and come back to it. Don't worry. Matt says the Lakers really missed out in free agency, even with LeBron willing to take a pay cut. Yeah, the fact that they couldn't convince Jonas Valanciunas to come try to play for some playoff action was upsetting. I don't know that the other guys were going there because they probably end up getting more money elsewhere anyway. But it was really funny to me that JV was like, nope, you know what? I'd rather just go play a lot for Washington, because the writing's on the wall there. Like, if you're the big center that plays alongside AD, you're probably not going to get to play much in the playoffs anyway. And here's an interesting point. Dem Bird says, I'm listening a bit behind, but Kevin Porter Jr. feels like he needs a mention for potential fantasy value. Yes and no. This is a really good question. So Kevin Porter Jr., that was the last time he actually played a basketball game. Did he play at all this year? It doesn't matter. Previous year, when he was like a big part of what Houston was building, yuck. He played in about 60 ball games, 34 minutes a night, took 15 shots, averaged 19, 5, and almost 6 with 2.5 3-pointers, 1.4 steals on bad field goal percent, and meh free throw with kind of high turnovers. All of that is what it took to get him to 84. Now, during all this time off, did he have a chance to turn himself into like an 83% foul shooter? I don't know. But it is, I think, illuminating in that, like, you can't be the 4th or 5th option with his fantasy makeup and get inside the top 100. Yes, I think there's a path. There may be a game where, like, if Harden and Kawhi are both out and the Clippers are like, all right, Kevin, like, whatever, man, get nuts. But I think you're looking more at 1 or even 2 injuries away from him having a more consistent role. And I also don't think the Clippers are going to just give him one. Not to be like a contrarian here, but to me, he's going to have to earn every moment on that club, because he's coming off a bit of an ugly stretch. That's a great question, though. Didn't bring him up at least much, but worth noting, I think, that more burger boardy than anything else. Matt says, at least the Lakers got Dalton Connect in the draft. Yeah, I mean, we'll see. Like, I don't know much about these young guys. He'll play a little, I think, but Lakers right now are fine. They'd be like, oh, they got worse in free agency by losing Taurean Prince. I guess, but if Vanderbilt and Vincent are healthy, then that sort of, they probably got a tiny bit better. So I'd rather see Vanderbilt in there over Prince anyway, but they're going to need some shooting, and they got to do something. Like, I don't know how you can trot LeBron out there in his age 40, turning 40 this year, season, without improvements over last year. And I guess we can talk about it because today's a Lakers day. When Jared Vanderbilt was healthy this year, the Lakers looked pretty freaking good. Championship level? But they were better than a play-in team. And sadly, it was only like 3 weeks where Vanderbilt looked like himself because he had that long, slow slog to get into game shape this year, coming off, I think it was a heel thing, if I'm remembering right. And then he ended up with a different injury and blah, blah, blah. But when he was moving at full speed and just destroying passing lanes and as a really good on-ball defender against opposing big guards and wings, it changed a lot of what the Lakers were able to do because suddenly they had 2 guys on the floor that could defend instead of 1. Life's impossible for Anthony Davis as the only guy on the court that can actually defend anybody for the Lakers because Reeves and Russell are bad. LeBron is slow. He used to be a very good defender, but he's not anymore. Rui's not a good defender. Prince is not a good defender. Prince is fine, but he's not strong enough for where they wanted to play him. Gabe Vincent is decent on ball, but he was hurt most of the year too. So the guys the Lakers are getting back are going to make them a little bit better defensively, but they still got to take a swing. And I think you'll see them take it probably before the season starts so they have time to let the pieces settle a little bit. Another reason to do your fantasy draft pretty close to the start of the season, wouldn't you say? Maybe I should have broken this up into 2 shows, but I guess it's too late for that now on the YouTube side. Those of you listening after the fact, this might have been 2 shows. I don't know. I'll figure it out. The magic of audio editing. We'll learn later on. Thanks again for watching, listening, viewing, whatever, liking, subscribing, all that good stuff, everybody. I'm Dan Besbris. End of another week here on Old Man Squad Fantasy Basketball on the Old Man Squad Sports Network. Shout out to our brand new show on the Old Man Squad Sports Network called Ordinary Effort. I don't know if you guys remember Immaculate Grids. You should. They took off more on the baseball side than basketball, and that's what those guys do. It's just like a 15-minute show. It's great. They go through an immaculate grid together, laugh. You can hear about old ball players. It's a fantastic, quick listen. Strong recommend. Make sure you follow at Old Man Squad on social media because every show that comes out on the network will make sure to pump out from that feed as well. And that Twitter handle will follow you back. So you'll get a free follow out of it. Okay, went longer than expected, but this might be happening on some of these 2-a-days. Have a great weekend, everybody. We'll talk to you again on Monday.